very stressful time because I had my biggest material success in Ketu. I moved into an ashram. It was the Sikh ashram. And I started a production company making documentaries. Suffering of Saturn really, yeah, it's a pathway to God.
Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Vedic House. Today we have Tom with us who will be talking about his experience under the Ketu Mahadasha. He started reading astrological charts at the age of 12 when he was undergoing the Mahadasha of Saturn. And since then he has experienced Mercury, Ketu and is currently running under Venus Mahadasha. He has an extremely enticing journey, especially the experiences that he had under the Ketu Mahadasha. So much so that he left his materialistic world and went to do service for the homeless people. It will be a treat to watch Tom speaking about his journey and the advices that he has to share with us for those who are currently undergoing the Ketu Mahadasha. So stay tuned and have a look at the video. Welcome, Tom. Welcome to Indian Vedic House, and thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to be a part of this video.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Tom, I understand that you have had your Saturn Mahadasha, you have had your Mercury, you have had your Ketu, and probably Venus Mahadasha is going on for you right now, right?
Correct.
So we say that Saturn Mahadasha is very challenging and Ketu is even worse than that. So I understood from my discussion with you that though Saturn was bad for you, Ketu was even one step ahead of that, and you also had 17 years long marriage which got failed during that time. So what is your like did it did Ketu Mahadasha turn out to be a transformational period for you, and if yes, how did it transform you?
When the Ketu Mahadasha began, I moved into an ashram in my home state of Massachusetts, and it was a Sikh ashram. And I took a spiritual name. It was Tara Singh Khalsa, and I named my production company Terra Media. And Terra is the Sanskrit name for the possessive case of God. So it was a very spiritualizing event. And after my production company, it flourished like it took off like a rocket, and then it suddenly disappeared. I then worked in a homeless shelter. I had made a documentary about this homeless shelter, and then I began working in a homeless shelter. And I would say that I could look at my life and see a completely different change after I entered my Ketu Dasha. We talk about spiritualizing in that Dasha, and it does. It usually comes through suffering and loss and very unusual experiences. I mean, I went from working with very rich people to very poor people. And I remember a world famous psychic told me that I'd work in this homeless shelter for 2 years to correct the karmic imbalance. And she was absolutely right. 2 years to the day, I began a Venus Dasha, and I worked at an investment company which required me making videos for very wealthy people. It was really like night and day. I'm in trepidation because I'm in a Mercury subdasha, but I'll be in a Mercury, and I'll be in a K2 subdasha, and it's like, what will that be like? So we'll see. And Venus was very interesting because I got married and had a pretty good job and a really good home, and the marriage was a little bit crazy. But what I noticed was that my Venus in my Navamsha chart is in Aquarius, and it has an exchange with Rahu, and it's like this was definitely a Venus Rahu kind of relationship, really like a little crazy, you know.
I can imagine. And looks like you saw both sides of the coin in the Ketu Mahadasha and then in the Venus Mahadasha. I think that definitely gives hope to a lot of our viewers who are currently undergoing Ketu Mahadasha and having a tough time. So they have a light at the end of the tunnel where they can have a hope that, okay, once this is over, their Venus Mahadasha may bring better results for them.
The other thing about the Venus Mahadasha is that that's when I discovered Bhakti Yoga. And it was funny because astrology has led me to my spiritual path. So in the Venus Mahadasha, I became a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna and totally changed my life. So while Venus had a great contribution to my material well-being and my prosperity, I think the lasting gift of that Mahadasha really is my understanding of Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga and Raja Yoga. That was really, really beautiful.
Yeah. So, but you might have turned more spiritual during the Ketu period itself, right? The Ketu Mahadasha.
A different kind of spirituality, yeah. The spirituality of working with people that were um, homeless, had addiction problems, and it's interesting because what happened was that I had done a documentary on privately owned islands in the Rahu part of the Ketu Dasha. And then, I mean, imagine that I was talking to people who own private islands, so these billionaires. And then the next week, I was doing a documentary on homeless people. So I went from Rahu to Ketu. It was really, you know,
That's a
like
drastic. Yeah.
this is the world.
So, I understand you got inclined towards astrology at a very young age of 12 when you were going through Saturn Mahadasha. Then you turned very spiritual when you came to Ketu Mahadasha, and then you became a little materialistic and religious, along with being more prosperous in the Venus Mahadasha. So, how was Mercury Mahadasha in between, Tom? Considering that we spoke about Saturn, Ketu, and Venus, it would be interesting to know what changes Mercury brought for you.
Well, Mercury was interesting because what happened was I began working um, in television, and um, it was I had started my career in advertising in Saturn, and then as soon as the Mahadasha changed to Mercury, I just had this urge to want to work in television. So I worked in television and talk shows and news magazines and every which way about communication, and a lot of the programs that we would do, which would be programs that had to do with personal transformation, things, people that had gambling addictions or alcohol addictions or substance abuse addictions or you know difficulties with their families. It was just a real gift because my Mercury natally is in my 12th house, and in my Navamsha, it's in an exchange with Mars from the second to the seventh house, and the Mercury is in Scorpio. So I would deal with all these scorpionic topics. I interviewed a serial killer, people that were on death row. I went to all the prisons in my state. It was really interesting to see how that Mercury Mahadasha manifested in the people that I interviewed and the stories that I did.
I think you have had a very beautiful journey, Tom, starting from Saturn to Mercury to Ketu to Venus. You have seen drastic shifts in the energies and your life pattern with the change of every dasha and every planet coming into play, right? I mean, it's just so beautiful and amazing to experience that and to be able to make out that difference as per the planetary energies that are acting at that point of time.
And as soon as I moved into the Mercury subcycle of Venus, two things happened. I retired. I began living on an island off the coast of Maine, so I'm pretty secluded, And then my wife decided she don't be married anymore. So it was just, the power of Mercury in the 12th house was really hard to anticipate. But if you look at how it manifested, yeah, I'm very secluded, but in a very beautiful community, very beautiful place. I reconnected with a partner from a very early part of my life, which was just very fulfilling, is very fulfilling. So, and because the nakshatra lord of my Mercury is Lord Yama. Oh my goodness, Yama is about death, rebirth, transformation. It's a very powerful nakshatra, the Bharani nakshatra. So that's the other thing that I think we always have to pay attention to is not just the grahas, but exactly the nakshatras and the lords of the nakshatras.
I agree. And I think this is a perfect example of how nakshatras influence our lives as well. Yeah. And because Tom, you also said that Ketu period has been the toughest for you. You, apart from having a failed marriage and detaching yourself from the materialistic world and going and working for homeless people and people who were into addiction and all that, was there any other challenge that you faced during the Ketu Mahadasha?
Um, I think, I think that it brought me to my knees and dissolved a good part of my ego. It's, we talk a lot about a ripe ego and an unripe ego, but until you've really experienced these kinds of things, you get a chance to see that, there are higher powers and higher forces working through you. And, if you're lucky, you'll have a good spiritual path, not a bad spiritual path, but a good spiritual path. And, you'll take all these challenges as gifts and if possible embrace it with gratitude because I think the universe is benevolent and it's on your side.
Absolutely. So, Tom, while you were going through that tough period of Ketu, how did you keep yourself motivated? How did you manage to sail through it?
um, I worked with traditional Vedic remedies, so I tried to be charitable and help people that were less fortunate. um, I tried to place an emphasis on others and not just on myself. Um, that seemed to be the real key. The key was to understand the power of giving and the power of selfless service. So I think I did volunteer work, and I think that really, and then K2 Saturn was particularly difficult. I got married, I think out of real hopelessness and desperation, thinking that the person I married would be a good partner. Um, we shattered that illusion. So I think things like that. I think that, one of the good things about the practice of Vedic astrology is that there are these remedies that can really help you work with the energies. It's not a magic wand. You have to practice it, but part of the practice, I think, is to escape your own egocentricity and begin to think about the divine, about a bigger picture, about helping others, where you fit in that way.
Yeah, can't agree more to that, Tom. And when we talk about remedies, apart from doing some charity work, helping others, was there anything else that you were doing? Maybe, some mantras, chanting, any form of worshipping, or anything else that you must have been doing?
Yeah, I really understood how mantras, which I think it means mind fortress, are very important in being able to take your mind, which can really have garbage thoughts. I mean, your mind can really be, stop thinking and start trying to live into your heart. But yeah, I think that the pain and the suffering, the confusion and the disorientation, it's almost like you can't have anything to hold on to. And in that, you find something to hold on to. I think you know what I mean. I don't know if I have the words to explain it, but it's like that, you know. And what I've noticed in my work is that people become addicted with Rahu, but they lose their addictions with Ketu when they become very spiritual, when they, turn it over to God, when they, um, yeah, that's what I've noticed. Oh, the other thing about the Ketu Dasha that I will say is that I did a lot of uh, documentaries in foreign, I did 3 documentaries in Russia and in Germany, so there was a lot of foreign travel, um, and it was very, um, I don't know, it was just, these experiences that just they come, they do what they're supposed to do, I guess, in teaching you, and then they're over. I feel like I've had many lifetimes in one lifetime because of these dashes. I mean, I wonder about people that are able to stay in one place and do one job for 50 years. It's like, what's that like? Or to be married to one person for 50 years. What's that like?
Yeah, it's interesting, Tom. And now that you have been through all of that and have done really well, considering the different kind of energies that you dealt with under the different dashas, if you have to give one piece of advice to people who are currently undergoing a tough time of Ketu, what would that be, Tom?
Turn to God. Yeah, really, really be serious in your search for God. And don't, I mean, find a good spiritual path. There are some others, you be very careful about what you believe. Find a good spiritual path, turn to God, and surrender. I mean, in my country, surrender is sort of a bad word. You would never surrender. But in the real sense of what surrender is, and letting go and opening up to a higher power and seeing God in everyone and everything, that I think will help you through any difficult time, especially when K2 comes at you.
Thank you so much, Tom, for the wonderful words. And no matter how many people I talk to about Ketu Mahadasha, the one word that comes out at the end of every discussion is to surrender. Uh, I mean, it's a beautiful experience that people have, in my opinion, under the Ketu period, just if they learn to surrender and do it gracefully. I think in one of the talk shows, another guest of mine was telling me that if you do not learn the lessons that Ketu is trying to teach you, then you have to go through those hardships. The easily you learn, the easier the life becomes for you. So I think it's very true for the Ketu experience. What do you think about that?
Well, I specifically remember when K2 transited my natal moon. Oh, it was, I went to a church which was famous for miracles. And when you walked into this church, they had crutches and wheelchairs that they collected as sort of evidence of miracles. And I would go to this church on my knees and I would pray because um, when K2 went over my moon, I was I was desperately afraid that I would lose my job because at the time my stepson was fighting cancer, and if I lost my job, then I wouldn't have health insurance, and I was just very worried about that. And I just remembered how intense the pain was as K2 transited my moon. And then the day that it went off, it was like, someone flipped a switch. and that was by transit. That wasn't a subdasha or a mahadasha, but and I've talked to people that have had Ketu going over their moon, and it's hard to describe, except it's painful. And in this country, the former president, Donald Trump, has by birth a Ketu moon conjunction in Scorpio. I can't imagine, like what that must be like. He also has a sun Rahu conjunction in the 10th house. So imagine that sun Rahu in the 10th house in Taurus, and Ketu moon in Scorpio in the 4th house. Oh my gosh, oh.
But I guess still he managed to become the president of US. So we do have hope for people with similar planetary placements.
Well, I wonder if he'll ever surrender. I wonder if he'll ever have a moment of realization of the divine.
Wasn't that an interesting conversation? I loved every minute of it. And if you did so too, then do not forget to like and share it with your friends. And also do remember to subscribe to my channel for more such videos.